An archaeologist with us today. This is new ground for us, pardon the pun.
So to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Tell us about Uzi Baram and how'd you find him?
I've known Uzi for several years. He works at New College in Florida, and he is both an anthropologist and an archaeologist. And he's been doing some really interesting excavations in Manatee County that I'm hoping we can get into. He's a very effective public speaker, and he's a really good representative for archaeology, and he is not Indiana Jones by any stretch of the imagination. Is there a role for archaeology to correct the historic record? And are there some examples from Florida?
Yeah, it's easy to kind of make fun of historians, right? And academics like to make fun of each other. So it would be too easy to make us stick figures. But there is sort of this notion that if you look just at documentary records, you're getting the view of those who wrote it and those who archived it. And that tends to be skewed so that we don't hear indigenous voices. We don't read firsthand accounts of the enslaved or of women or of workers. And archaeology has always taken its role to give voice to those voiceless that aren't in the archives. And so we have, first of all, just that long history of Native Americans in the peninsula. So we have the oral traditions from Native Americans. The archaeological materials just adds to it, provides the visuals so we can see the places and the things. But even in the recent past, the project that has taken a lot of my energy, we knew that Florida was part of the Underground Railroad. Fort Muse by St. Augustine is well known. The place itself was excavated in the 1980s by Kathleen Deegan and Jane Landers, and it's a state historical park. There's another very important outpost of Black freedom on the Apalachicola River, Prospect Bluff, and there's a state park there as well. But the story was that kind of people of African heritage were living in Florida. The question became, well, where? So we knew about Fort Muse, we knew about Prospect Bluff. We know from the historic record that in Spanish-Love Florida in 1816, the fort that the British built for these maroons, as we refer to these freedom-seeking people, was blown up, and the survivors went south. And we know many of them went south to Suwannee, where the Seminoles had a community. And then Andrew Jackson came with his Tennessee Volunteers in 1818 and attacked that. And the historic record kind of ended at that point, and then picks up in 1835. The work I've been doing, thanks to leadership by Cantor Brown Jr. and community scholar Vicki Oldham, was where those people went. And it turned out they went to what was a small community on the Manatee River that has gotten the name Angola, and they came in the hundreds. So by 1818, there was probably 700 people south of the Manatee River, people of African heritage living in freedom. And the archival record says almost nothing about them. The excavations give us a sense of their daily lives and a really robust sense of their trade relations with British supporters, the foods they ate, the structures, the cabins they built and lived in, the fields they had. None of that was coming out of their historic record. All came from archaeology. And so, there's a tremendous role. If we're interested in people's daily lives, if we're interested in places that weren't written about, archaeology is the avenue.
Let me sketch out a little background here for folks who may be confused, and do correct me, both of you, if I'm wrong. Florida was offered the opportunity to, as we get to this Underground Railroad piece of it, Florida was offered the opportunity to be an original colony, turned it down to stay with Spain, so that plantation economy did not exist here to the extent it did in South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, those sort of places. We hear so much about the Underground Railroad going to Canada, going to the north. This was an opportunity to go through the back door, so to speak. And it's interesting you talk about that and how underknown it is, because it, until this conversation, never occurred. Well, of course, if you're an enslaved person in Georgia, South Georgia, why wouldn't you go to Florida instead of, which is 50 miles away instead of 500 miles away to Ohio? It really strikes home that gaping hole in the historical record and our education, candidly, about that period of time.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you went to St. Augustine, the commandant there could grant you your freedom as long as you converted to Catholicism, right?
Yeah, that is starting 1893. If anyone escaped from enslavement in the Anglo colonies, got to St. Augustine, accepted Catholicism, accepted the rule of the Spanish king, you could be free. Guess
Well, wait, now,
what?
not 1893. It
I was
was
going to say
before that.
1693.
16.
Yeah, 1693. Okay.
Very good.
You heard that, 1693. Right, and it's something I always stress, right? It's part of this heritage of freedom. No one wants to be enslaved. People did anything they could. And we think about the courage of someone who's maybe taken across the Atlantic in the Middle Passage, sold, living on a plantation, South Carolina or Georgia, and hearing that if you go south, you might get your freedom through parts unknown, through the swamps, through all the dangers.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers that we have has to be just a small percentage of those who tried. And we start realizing no one accepted slavery. Not everyone was able to escape, but so many over those generations. And Florida was a major place of refuge.
What number of contemporary people can directly and authentically trace their lineage back to those, I'm going to say, Angola, that community?
One of the things that we have with Angola, and we've been really blessed that, sorry, that's my cat meowing.
As long as mine doesn't hear and start meowing back, I think we'll be okay.
Every time I've given a couple of conference papers, he always seems to need to jump in. It's pretty disconcerting.
It's cat fur. I object.
Actually, he's anti-racist. I think he's supportive.
Okay.
Okay, back to my regular program. When we started the project looking for Angola, one of the team members had done ethnographic work with the descendants after the destruction of the community in 1821. Some of the survivors went inland, but others, with the help of the British and Cuban fishermen, went to the British Bahamas. They had been promised they could live in British lands in freedom as part of just all the warfare and violence of the era, and hundreds went. And they settled on Andros Island on the west side of the island where they could find refuge. And they lived there for generations. It was only in the 1960s a road was built to them. And Rosalind Howard, who was at the University of Central Florida, did a year of ethnographic research. The elders knew of their connection to Florida. She found the archival evidence that they came in 1821 and tied together some of the names of the people who had been captured in the raid that destroyed Angola, escaped before they got to Georgia, and reached the British Bahamas. So the evidence is wonderful and clear. And I've gone to Red Bays, and we've had, even when I was doing the excavations, one of my excavators is a descendant from Angola who happens to be trained in archaeology and lives in Atlanta, came down and joined us. And there's another descendant who lives in Bradenton, Daphne Towns, who I consult with all the time and has been just lockstep with us as we've tried to figure out how to understand this heritage. So again, close relations with the descendants. And it's been a really just an honor to be able to bring that forward so that the descendants in Andros Island and their diaspora know more about the history of their ancestors and really the courage and determination of the ancestors, not just reaching, as you all know, the map of Florida, to get all the way down to the Manatee River, to live in a place where this is before air conditioning, right? It's hot, it's hostile, there's snakes. There's a lot of criticism.
No I-75 to hitchhike down either. You're bushwhacking through it.
A thriving community of hundreds of people. And although it was destroyed in 1821 in slavery, they still wanted to live in freedom for their children and grandchildren that they moved across the Everglades, took boats across the Florida Straits, and created a new life and were successful, right? From the 1820s, they were able to live in freedom. They were never enslaved. Their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, I guess great-great-grandchildren have been living in freedom ever since. It's so inspiring to know that for them, and I think really for all of us, that urge, that flame of freedom burns so brightly. And it was here, literally not far from where I live, not far from where Craig lives.
Mm-hmm. And not far from the Gamble Mansion, which is sort of a tribute to slavery here in Florida.
Yes, and that's the other side, right? We still have lots to do. The Gamble Plantation, Joseph Gamble came in the 1840s, built a plantation, enslaved hundreds of people to grow sugar. So on the place that people had found freedom, he created a slave regime. He was unsuccessful. He went to financial ruin. The ones who followed him also went to financial ruin. And ultimately, a civil war ensured that slavery ended, but the house remained. the big house, which is a
Yeah.
nice neoclassical building made out of tabby but whitewashed to look really bright. And the early 20th century was added to the collection of state parks, but under the management for the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And it's a Confederate monument. And I was able to be part of a symposium to discuss that commemoration. And one of the points is quite simple. I go by it occasionally. It's in Ellington, Florida. It's not too far away. It's in an urban area. The property itself is beautiful. It's nicely kept up. The big house is pleasant in terms of seeing some period furniture and walking around it. And every time I've gone, there's almost no one there. And it's not a very good use of state resources. As a citizen of this state, I want resources to be used well. And I know that one of the major limiting features is it's the Judah P. Benjamin Confederate Monument. It's dedicated to the Confederacy, to gamble as a good master, which is not an appropriate term. And people don't go because it's not telling a history that makes sense to anyone. The Angola history of freedom makes sense. There's not too many Americans who are kind of, hey, let's see how slavery worked because maybe we can have it back. It just doesn't fit the times.
Yeah.
You know, I'm hopeful that the states will intervene, make it into a memorial for the people who work there, who struggled there, and remembering their labor and their lives. That I think will attract people to what's ultimately, again, a beautiful piece of property. But we have on either side of the Manatee River, one a site of freedom, one a site of slavery. And it does take some good historical knowledge to know that freedom came first, slavery came after that, and then freedom again.
So Uzi Baram, and this has really been an enlightening conversation. I've enjoyed tremendously.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks so much for being our guest.
I was really fascinated throughout that conversation.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't expect it to go well, but we got into some area that was really enlightening personally to me that I was unaware of.
Sure. Well, his work in Angola is just fascinating, and I was glad we were able to get him to talk about that some.
Yeah,
and put it in context.
Yeah, that is not a story like so many of these stories of minority populations, not only in Florida, but in all of America, that is largely unrecorded and erased from our history books. And I am really looking forward to keeping my antenna tuned to that. And then the next time I'm down in that area, checking it out. Have you had a chance to visit any of those sites?
No, I found out about this, during the pandemic. So
incredible. And again, you have lived in this state your entire life, been in the political climate, the news, that whole thing. And a lot of these stories are even unfamiliar to you, which goes to show the extent to which they were not overlooked, purposefully omitted.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and one of the big questions you run into as you read Florida history is who's telling the story. And sometimes it's being told by people who leave things out. So it's good that there are archaeologists there to dig into things, so to speak.